Okay, tonight we are in chapter 3, starting with verse 1. Now, I'm going to be trying to cover the whole chapter tonight. And so I might say that really, if we wanted to get down and go in word for word, this chapter contains a lot of material. But we're going to try to put it all together so we can see it as a whole. And the reason I say that is because so oftentimes, I know with me, the way I preach it, the way I teach it, and so forth, I look here and I see that he says certain things to teachers, and then I see that he says certain things to people about their tongue, and then about some division. And so I will try to take it in chunks and take a look at it like this. But tonight I want to take really the whole picture here in chapter 3. So we'll be going pretty rapidly over some of these verses here. Now, as we look at the subject matter tonight, this third chapter is going to be about one little member of your body. And as we look at practical Christianity, it's going to be talking about the tongue, just the nature, the nature and the danger that there is in the tongue. The most dangerous part of your body is the tongue. Now, as we look here, we could go back to the past, and there's no use for us trying to put all this tape together, but we could go back and we could see, that James spent a lot of time talking about that if you look into the perfect law of liberty and you hear what it says, but then you don't do it, if you're not a doer, then he tells about that. Then he comes on down, last week where he was talking about faith, that if you don't put your works where your words are. If you just say, go and be filled, what profit is there in it? And so he's talking about words and works and so forth. Now then, tonight we're going to zero in on the tongue. And we're going to see in practical Christianity, in everyday life, how dangerous that tongue is and how we need to control that tongue as we live for Jesus Christ. Now, that's the first thing we're going to see is a warning to teachers. He's going to be talking about this. Now, when you say a warning to teachers, you say, okay, why is he warning them and what does he say? Well, just look here in verse 1. He said, "But be not many of you teachers, my brethren, knowing that we shall receive the heavier judgment." Now, when you look back at New Testament Christianity, and you look at the practical aspects of it, what went on in that century, especially when you get into the book of 1 Corinthians, you see there that there was a great drive, a great desire for people of the New Testament times to be in the public, to be speakers, to be teachers. When they had these spiritual gifts, why they wanted to get up and they wanted to use those spiritual gifts. Which spiritual gift was it that they wanted to use all the time? And Paul told them and said, no, there's a purpose for it, but not too often. You remember which one he told them? The speaking in tongues. If we can get up and speak in tongues, and I can speak in whatever language you want me to speak in and so forth, there was a lot of glory in that. And so people were trying to do that, and Paul had to write that section telling them that that really is not what you do. Now here, he's going to be warning people who want to be teachers to stop and think about it. In practical Christianity, don't just say, okay, I want to be a teacher, and so I'm going to start teaching. So now then he says, be not many of you teachers, my brethren, and he tells them why. For we shall receive the greater condemnation. Now the reason for that is because when you're a teacher, if you don't really know what you're talking about, and if you don't present the truth, then you're going to be presenting something that is not true. You're either going to be presenting true doctrine, or you're going to be presenting false doctrine. And what happens when a teacher presents false doctrine? What happens to the people who hears him then as he does that? See, they're going to accept that, and they're going away believing false doctrine, and they're going to practice false doctrine. And so, if you take somebody who really hasn't prepared themselves. They don't know what they're talking about, but they really want to be a teacher, and so they get up and they teach. Do you see how much damage could come from this? And so he says, now, in the use of your tongue, just remember this, that if you are going to be a teacher, that you're going to have to incur heavier judgment. Your judgment is going to be strict. Your judgment is going to be harsh because of you not knowing what you're talking about. Now, when he says, be not many of you teachers, my brethren, is he trying to discourage people and say, what I would like for everybody in the church to do is not be a teacher? Is that what he's saying? My advice is, don't any of you be a teacher. See? That's not what he's doing, because he has commanded us to teach, hadn't he? We are to teach our fellow man. We are to teach. He told Paul in 2 Timothy 2:2 that he is to train young men, train teachers who will be capable and able to teach others also. But what he's saying is that I wish that everybody would be a teacher. In fact, he condemns and exhorts people against their laxity because they're not teachers. In Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 12, he said, when the time came that you ought to be teachers, you have need that somebody teach you again what be the first principles of the oracles of God. In other words, you haven't studied. You haven't prepared yourself. So there is a time when we ought to be teachers. But it's only after we have prepared ourselves, confident that we know the truth, and confident that we are capable of teaching that truth. Now, when it comes down to that, as you look across the spectrum, how many people would be qualified to do that? Now, before you even answer that, stop to think. When Paul gives us the illustration of the church and the body in 1 Corinthians 12, when he said, you know that each one of us is a member of the body, what is it that he emphasizes there? Does he emphasize that everybody ought to be a tongue? Everybody ought to be an eye? No. Each one of us has an ability that other people do not have. See, he has this. He's telling us God didn't make us so everybody has the capabilities of being a teacher. So don't everybody try it. If you have the capabilities, then do it. Now, the warning is then, in practical Christianity, don't jump the gun and use your tongue to become a teacher until you're qualified to do so. That's his point. Now, while we're on the tongue, then the second thing that he's going to be talking about is a warning to everybody. Now, teachers are never out of this. Teachers are in there, but right here is a section that would obviously refer to everybody concerned. Notice here as he starts out and he says this. He said, for many things we all stumble, and if any stumbleth not in word, the same is a perfect or mature man. Now, as I put this down, I hesitate to say this is only to teachers, because I don't think it is, but it is to teachers. The context is showing us, but it obviously is for all of us. Now he tells us that that we all stumble in many things. We all make mistakes and we stumble. Then he tells us about the gravity of the tongue or our word. If any man stumbleth not in word, if you ever come to the point in your life where you have your tongue under control, and that doesn't cause you to stumble and to commit sin, then you have become a perfect man. Now, the word perfect here means the same way that it means all the way through the Scriptures. It doesn't really have anything to do with sinlessness. What does perfect mean? It means complete or mature. In other words, when you have brought yourself to the point to where you can say, I have control of my tongue. I don't use my tongue and teach something false. I don't use my tongue to cause other people to stumble, say something that I shouldn't say. When you can say, I have control of my tongue, then you can say, I am a mature, full-grown Christian. I have conquered everything. So what he's saying is that that the tongue is the last thing that you're going to conquer. He said, a man that's able to bridle the whole body also. So if you can control your tongue, you're not going to have any problems with the rest of your body because it's the hardest thing to control. Now to show that, he's going to show the danger in this small tongue that we have here. He says, now if we put horses' bridles into their mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body also. All you got to do is take a bridle, put it in the horse's mouth, and then you have control of the horse. Now if you have control of his mouth, then you turn his head, whatever you do, you're in control of his whole body. The point is, when you can control that tongue, you're not going to have any problem with the rest of your body. You're going to have it under control. That's how powerful the tongue is. He said, behold the ships also. Though they are driven, though they are so great, they are so great. In other words, they're great big ships, and are driven by rough winds, are yet turned about by a very small rudder, whether the impulse of the steersman willeth. So he said, you can look at a great big ship. And as you look at that ship, it's gigantic. And you can put it out in an ocean where there are strong winds. And yet, you can control that whole ship by one small rudder and get it to go wherever you want it to go. So if you can control that rudder, you can control the whole ship. That's the way the tongue. You can control the tongue, you're going to be able to control your life. He said, so the tongue also is a little member and boasteth great things. So just like the bit in a horse's mouth, or just like a rudder on a ship, so a tongue in relation to that is just a small part of your body, but it boasts great things. It does a great deal of damage. Then he says, behold. Now this is just an exclamation here, just saying what it is. Behold, how much wood is kindled by how small a fire. So he said, now stop to think how much wood can be kindled or burned up by how small a fire. He said, and the tongue is a fire. So I said, if you look at the tongue as a fire, how much fuel, wood, can be burned by how small a fire? Now, we've been seeing these fires down in California. Gigantic fires, burning up hundreds of homes. How did they all start? How big was the fire? It was just a little paper, a cigarette, a spark from an electric line. It's just a small little bit, but then it grows, and how much damage does it do? So that's what he says in practical Christianity. When we use our tongue, and when we say a wrong word, there is no limit to how much damage that word can cause. So we need to understand the power that there is in there. He said the tongue is a fire. The world of iniquity among our members is the tongue, which defileth the whole body. So when he says the world of iniquity, what he's trying to say is it would be kind of like we'd say a colloquial statement of it's unlimited. I know, I remember back when I was on the farm, and we'd plant tomatoes. And back in the Midwest, but the tomatoes just grow all over the place. And you go out in the garden and tomatoes are everywhere, and they start rotting, and you eat all of them, and you can all of them you do everything you can, and then you start giving them away to people. Hey, do you need some tomatoes? Oh, no, I got so many tomatoes, you know. How about you? Do you need some tomatoes? I just got worlds of them. Now, what do I mean? When my mom says, I just got worlds of them, see? She's making a point. How many tomatoes does she have? Just, you can't imagine how many tomatoes. Well, that's what he's saying in here as he's saying this. It's a world of iniquity. How much iniquity can the tongue cause? Sin can come talk, just worlds of it. He said it defiles the whole body. Your tongue can corrupt your whole body, and setteth on fire the wheel of nature, and is set on fire by hell. Now this term, wheel of nature, is interesting. It's a wheel of, and then nature is the word birth. It's the wheel of birth. Now, you say, what does it mean? Well, it means something like this, that it's a wheel. Now, the influence of this thing is going to be so big that you're going to start out, and it's a wheel. Now, you start this fire right here, and it goes around. Where is the end of it? There is no end, is there? See? It goes around. The wheel has no end. Now, is it talking about sins that just go on and on and on from one generation to another generation? That's what some people think it means, and it could well be that. Other people think it means that it's something that controls your life, that it starts out when you're born. It's the wheel of birth. Of when you're born, your whole life is consumed and caused problems by the tongue. So your tongue can just cause you problems for your entire life. Well, it would be one of those. I don't know which one it is. I think we get the picture out of either one, that it is the tongue, when it speaks words, puts a fire out, and that fire just continuously goes, and it goes around just like a wheel. There's no end to it. You see, that is there. Then he says, now it's set on fire by hell. Now, to tell how bad these sins are that we use and say our tongues with, the origin is, he says, it's something that comes out of hell. It's a hellish thing. It's not a heavenly thing. It's not a good thing. But when you stop to think of how you use your tongue, you can use your tongue, and it is so powerful, it just sets in course, sets in a nature, a wheel that goes continuously, goes and goes and goes, and a world of iniquity, and the origin of it is hell. He's really making a point of how bad sin is with our tongue, isn't he? How bad that it can really be. Now he says in verse 7, for every kind of beast and birds, of creeping things and things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed by mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It's a restless evil. It's full of deadly poison. So now, here we have him saying then, in this case, that mankind is so smart, so strong, so capable, so skilled, that you take any and all kind of living creatures on the face of the earth, from snakes to whales to lions to elephants, whatever it is, and men have learned how to control them. But one thing man hasn't learned how to do is control his tongue. That's how dangerous that a tongue really is. Now, when you look at an animal that has been tamed and they are really under control, you're looking at something like a dog or a cat, and we can let them run loose, and they run around, and if one of them bites you, it's the a small percentage that would do such a thing. It's an odd thing. People say, I was bit by a dog. But if you go out in the woods somewhere, and you're out there, and there's a lion or a cougar, would you be apt to get attacked? In other words, would it be a strange thing if they then did attack you because they're a wild creature? No. When you even see them caged up, why do they put these wild animals in cages? You ever seen these wild animals in cages and they just walk back and forth? just back and forth, and they're looking at you, and they're looking at you and back and forth. And we hear it all the time. Heard it, 2 weeks ago, where one of the caretakers jumped in the cage of I don't know, was a bear or a lion, and was attacked and mauled, and we hear about it all the time. You have to keep these wild animals caged up. Your tongue is much more wild than a wild animal. So think about that. We need to control that tongue. Man has learned how to control everything except that tongue. Then he shows in the realm of nature how really, how should you put it, how dumb we are, how dumb it is. He says, 9, therewith bless we the Lord and Father, and therewith curse we men who are made after the likeness of God. Now, he said here our tongue has this ability. It's an ability that you don't find anywhere else. That's the point that he's going to make. You have this ability. You have the ability with your tongue that you bless God the Father, and you tell how great He is and how you respect Him. And then you turn around to your fellow man, somebody that's made in the image of God, and you curse them. And you do it with the same tongue. Same tongue. Now he says, it said in verse 10, out of the same mouth cometh forth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be. Do you suppose in practical Christianity that it might behoove us next time we get ready to say something about somebody and tell somebody how bad somebody is, that maybe we should stop and think that we're just getting ready to commit a sin? We're getting ready to say something, do something that is not done anywhere else in nature. And to show us that, he says, look, he says in verse 11, doth the fountain send forth from the same offering bitter water, sweet water and bitter? Can a fig tree, my brethren, yield olives, or a vine figs, neither can salt water yield sweet? Now, over in that country, this would be more meaningful than it would be in this country. Because over there, water is very scarce. And they get their water out of springs, if they can find a spring. If not, they dig a well. But if you can find a spring, that is the greatest source of water that you can possibly find. Now, when you find a spring, and you see the water is coming out of that spring, it becomes a source of water really for the whole city. It's a very precious thing. Now, what are the chances of you going up and you getting water, and it's just the sweetest water you've ever tasted? It's really nice. An hour later, you go back and you get you a bucket of water, and it's bitter. It's changed. Go back an hour later, and it's pure again. It's sweet. No. He said you don't find that. You don't find it where you get nice fresh water one time, and then salt water the next time, and then fresh water. You don't find that in nature. In nature, that doesn't happen. And you look out your window. As you look out the window, almost everybody, say look out there in their yard, they'd have an olive tree and a fig tree and a vine. Some grapes, just normal things that they had, things that they used every day. Well, when you look out this morning and you see your fig tree and it has some figs on it, what are the chances in the morning when you look out, there are no figs on that tree, but there are grapes on that fig tree? What are the chances? None. But that's what we do. He said, that's what we are. What would you say about a fig tree that one day it produces figs, the next day it produces olives, the next day it produces grapes, and you can't tell what it's going to produce? Would it be a mixed up fig tree? The God that made everything to produce after its own kind. Now, since God made it to produce after its own kind, if the kind of tree is fig, what will the fruit be? Figs. Now, if God has made us to produce after our own kind. And so here I am, and the fruit now tells you the kind of man I am. Can you tell the kind of tree it is by the fruit that's on it? Yeah. How sure is it? How sure can you be when you see a tree has fruit on it, and you go up and you look at the fruit? How sure can you be that that's the kind of tree that it is? See? Now, up here I'm standing, and God has made me. What kind of man am I? Well, I'm a man that blesses God. I bless God. Wow, I'm impressive. And the next minute, I'm cursing God's image. Wow. What kind of tree am I? That's his whole point. He's saying man has this ability so that we act this way and we do something that you can't find anywhere else in nature. It just shows how mixed up we really are in all of these things here. I've got a couple of verses right here to bring up about a fire and a tongue. Over in Proverbs it says, "A worthless man deviseth mischief, and his lips there is a scorching fire." So the Proverbs talk about how that you can use your lips and cause fire. And it says, "As a madman casteth firebrands, arrows and death, so is the man that deceiveth his neighbor." So here it is, you take somebody that goes out and casts a firebrand. Now what is a firebrand? Well, it would be something like, you know what a cattail is that you see out in some of the wetlands and that got out here? Or some weed that has a head on it that you can set on fire and it will burn like a lamp or a torch. What would you say if there's a guy that's going around town and he has a firebrand? Today we would say, okay, we'll go up to Lowe's and we will buy these patio torches. That's firebrand. What would you say if a guy goes up and he buys these patio torches? He's got 50, 100 of them, and he just goes through town and he's just throwing them, just throwing these fire. What would you say about the guy? Would there be any damage done? Now he said, that is like a man that's going around and using his tongue that is in there. 20. For lack of wood the fire goeth out, and a whisper. He causes contentions, and as coals to hot embers. And so we see that it uses this to show, the Proverbist does, that our tongue and lips are like a fire. Now, he goes ahead, he talks about a poisonous snake, and Psalms 140 talks about that also. Now, the third warning is, as we get in here, in verse 13, the danger of the tongue in the mouth of those who consider themselves wise. But now, let's suppose I say, okay, I'm impressed by what James says. He's impressed me. I see the power of the tongue. I see the danger that can happen to it. But I'm a wise man. And so I really don't have to worry. Now, I can understand how that would happen to you guys, see. But it wouldn't happen to me because I'm a wise, understanding person, see. So I really don't have to worry about such a thing. That's the kind of guy that he's talking about right now. He said, who is wise and understanding among you? So that's his question. Now, let's define some words as we go here now. The word wise means skilled or expert, skilled in letters, cultivated, and learned. That it's a learned, skilled individual. Now, when you get into, remember the major thing he's talking about here are teachers. When you get into teachers, do you expect them to be skilled and studied and know what they're talking about? Right? Are there any teachers that says, yeah, I'm skilled, I'm learned, I'm educated, I know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Yeah. And that's pride, isn't it? See? That's pride. But sure. Now, what he says is, any of you feel that way about yourself? Any of you feel that you have all of these great abilities? Well, he said, let him show by his good life his works in meekness of wisdom. So now, he said, if that's what you think about yourself, you need to prove it. Well, what does it take to prove it? Well, okay, let me prove you how smart I am. I'm going to tell you, I'm really smart. I'm really wise. I know what I'm talking about. Now, that settled the matter, right? No. Well, how many times would I have to say it before it would settle the matter? And you would say, you know, Lowell is really a wise man. Talk the rest of my life, wouldn't it? See? And every time I'd say it, you'd just look at me as a bigger fool. Now, how do you tell whether a person is wise or not? So that's what he's saying right in here. It's not with your mouth. It's not by you talking. But let him show by his good life his works in meekness of wisdom. So let him show this. Oh, by the way, I skipped over the word understanding. There's wise or understanding. That word understanding means intelligent, experienced, especially one having knowledge of an expert in there. So, but it means the wise and the understanding, they're almost the same kind of word. They're both talking about a skilled, learned person that's supposed to really know what he's dealing with there. But now, if you really want to see, okay, do you have wisdom? Then he says, let him show by his good life his works in meekness of wisdom. So the only way that you can see if somebody is wise is you see their lives. You see their works. Now, for the 1700th time, what's the book of James about? Practical Christianity. Works. See? Doing that. You see, there's things you have to see. All right. Now, by his works, you show it. And by his works, then, you're going to see in here the meekness, in meekness of wisdom. The word meekness, definition, is that scholars say it's a quality of the soul, not just an outward action. It is the temper of spirit in which we accept God's dealings as good and without disputing or resisting Him. In other words, the basic idea is submitting to God without dispute. It is described in animals when speaking of a trained dog or a broke horse. The animal's mind is submitted to the mind of the owner. Best way I can explain it is like that, the way I like to think about it. Now, meekness. Normally when we think about a meek man, there's some weakness attached to it, isn't it? A lot of times you think of weakness. No. Meekness and weakness have no similarities whatsoever. Meekness is when one person submits their will to another person. Now, basically, it is in relation to God. When you accept God's dealings with you, whatever God sheds upon you, you accept it. And you don't argue with God, but you accept God's dealings in your life. And in those days, they would, if you had a bird dog, I suppose we've probably all seen, have you ever seen on TV a bird dog where they have these contests and they send this bird dog, they'll go out and they'll hide a pheasant or a duck a quarter of a mile out in there. Then a guy will take his dog and set him out. He'll just, like this, the dog will run out there for a couple of 100 yards and stop and look back, and the guy will point this way and he goes that way and he blows a whistle and points, and the dog just goes wherever he tells him to go and runs up on the hill, and the man just stands back there and with a whistle he'll blow one or two times to let the dog know what he wants to do, and all he does is point, and he points him and the dog goes and gets that duck, and then he brings him back. Now that's a trained dog, isn't it? That's a trained dog. That's kind of like all your dogs, right? Now, when you go home tonight and your dog doesn't do what you want it to do, you say, you know, that's not a meek dog. we need to put some meekness in that dog. Well, if you do, what does it mean? When you get your dog so it's meek, It means he has submitted his mind to your mind. You are in control. Charlene has horses, and you call them broke. There are horses, you say, well, is the horse broken? Well, he's green broke. What do you mean, Charlene? Somebody's going to sell you a green broke horse. Right? Well, it's a horse that is partially broken. I mean, you can get in the saddle, and you can kick him, and he'll go a little bit. But all of a sudden, that horse decides it wants to do what it wants to do, and it takes off and goes somewhere else, or it bucks. You can't trust that horse because it's green broke. It's green meek. Now, when you get the horse broken, that means you can get in that saddle, and that horse is there, and that horse's mind is controlled by your mind. You just squeeze your knees to tell it to do something. You want it to go to the left, you just push the pressure on the right knee, and it does this. Wherever you tell it to go, when you get to a river, and you go ahead and click it, it'll jump right in that river. It'll do whatever you want it to do. And you say, boy, isn't that horse something? Yeah, the person on the back of that horse is in total control. The horse's mind is submitted to the rider's mind. That's a meek horse. That's the way we should be with God. That's the way we should be with Him. Now, in our relationship to one another, if we show meekness toward each other, it really is the same kind of thing. Now, it's meekness of wisdom. Now, this means a certain kind or quality of meekness. It is a wise meekness. It's not just a foolish meekness. In other words, if I'm meek in relationship to you, and I accept things, do I do it with wisdom, or do I just do it in a foolish thing? In other words, you tell me to go jump off a 100-foot cliff, and I just go jump off a 100-foot cliff. See, you wouldn't think that I'm very wise. And so he says, this, though, is how that you're going to tell about this then in there. Now, in verse 13, then we get down here, verse 14, really we'll be getting in here. He says in 14, but if you have bitter jealousy and faction in your heart, glory not and lie not against the truth. So now, just the opposite of meekness. Just the opposite of meekness. Instead of me submitting my will to God's will, instead of me submitting my will to your will, I now am going to have bitter jealousy. So let's see what this means. If you have bitter jealousy. Now, the word bitter, it's something that leaves an unpleasant sensation in the mouth, or in this case, in your heart. If you eat something that's bitter, how do you define that? Well, that was bitter. You wrinkle your nose. It leaves an unpleasant sensation in your mouth. Now, I can have something in my heart, in my mind, and it's not pleasant. It's not a good thing to have. It causes me worry. It causes me a lot of things. It's an unpleasant feeling. It's a bitter feeling. Now he said jealousy. Okay, this word jealousy is an interesting word. It means an excitement of the mind, ardor, fervor of spirit. It means a zeal, an ardor in embracing, pursuing, or defending anything. Now, let me tell you that the word jealous in the Bible is exactly the same word as the word zeal in the Bible. It's exactly the same word. Zeal and jealous. And you can see how they are, how they could be translated one to the other. In English, we have jealousy. Now, if I ask you, is jealousy a good thing or a bad thing? What's that? Both. It's both. It's both. Jealousy is what makes a good husband. In other words, if I'm not jealous of Helen, and I don't particularly care whether she shares her life with somebody else or not, it doesn't make me any difference. Right? How will I treat her? How will I act? Right? But if I'm jealous and I begin to see that she's straying off a little bit, will it cause me to do something good to try to win her back? God is a jealous God. God was jealous over Israel. He was jealous when Israel went into the idols' temples and began to worship idols. He wanted them back. It's a good thing. But on the other hand, can jealousy be a bad thing? In other words, can I now become so jealous here that every time she turns around, I'm questioning her, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Where are you going? How much money did you spend? And so I'm just constantly on her back in this way, driving her crazy. That's a bad thing. Right? That's a bad thing. Now, in both cases, it's because of my zeal, isn't it? Because I have a fervent spirit. So it's used in both senses. Now, I've got down there, is used both in a good and bad sense, depending on what you are exciting about and pursuing with ardor or zeal. This may be seen in our word jealous. It may help your wonderful marriage to be a wonderful marriage, or it may be the bitter kind and destroy your marriage. And as the scholars say, it means a fierceness of indignation or punitive zeal. And so I get so jealous of Helen that if she goes to the store to get a quart of milk, when she gets back, I jump all over her. What do you think you're doing? Where did you go? Why didn't you tell me? And so I start in, and now I'm a zealous man, aren't I? I'm a fervent individual. But now it's in a bad situation. Now this is what he's talking about in here. This misplaced zeal that you have in here. A bitter jealousy and faction in your heart. Now the word faction really means a selfish hireling interested only in what you can get. Thayer says the word means electioneering or intriguing for office. A courting distinction, a desire to put oneself forward, a partisan, a factious spirit, which does not disdain low arts. Now, we have a word in here that in our country we've just gone through the past several months that would pretty well tell about this. What is a politician? Do they do anything like this? Was Obama and McCain, were they working in unity, or was there a separation? Was each one of them telling why I'm better than he is? See, that's just factious. That's what it's talking about. Now, if you're running for president, the better you are at it, the more likely you are to get elected. But in the church, if that's what you are, I am a factious person. Now then, I'm electioneering. I'm political. I'm setting people against Oliver over here. I feel I don't want Oliver to get too much influence. I want to be the man. And so I set out and I conduct myself in that way, so I divide up the church. See? So that's what it's talking about. So I divide the church, it'll be in factions, and that's a factious man that you've got. This faction, I thought I'd give this to you. I'm not going to charge you for this, but it's kind of interesting. So I looked at it and saw it today. This word originally meant, hundreds of years ago, a spinner of wool. Then it meant one hired to spin the wool. Then it dropped the wool and it meant a hireling. And then years later, 100 years later, it meant a selfish person, because a hireling is just working for themselves, and so it meant a selfish person, interested only in wages. And then it meant a partisan concerned with his own affairs. Not just somebody that was working, but somebody that all I want in life is just for me. Then it meant one who resorts to evil measures to accomplish one's desires. Now the last is the way it's used in the New Testament, see? A factious person. Now when you read this and you see a factious person, how many of you think about somebody who spins wool? You say, no, that's one of the old meanings, and that's the way words developed. See, it's the way words develop along the line, and we have to use them like they are. Now, this over here, you hear on instrumental music, and that's the reason I'm using it here, because it's kind of a parallel, that people will say, hey, doesn't the Greek word for saying over in Ephesians come from solo? And doesn't that mean playing on a harp, playing a musical instrument? And so shouldn't we sing with a musical instrument today? Doesn't the Greek teach that? Well, here is what you find in this case. Originally, the word solo meant to pluck off or pull out, and it had to do with hair. You're soloing your hair. Then, since you're doing this, there's a vibration. Then it meant vibrate by touching. Anything that you vibrate by touching. Then it meant to twang. Pick up and you twang. And then it meant to twang a carpenter string. So when a carpenter had his string out there, and you come and you twang it. So go solo the string is what you would say. And then, since you take that carpenter string and you twang it, then it meant later to twang the harp string. We'll do the same thing to the string on a harp. And then it meant to play a harp. So you're going to solo the harp. And then it meant to sing with the harp. And then finally the harp was moved out, and it just meant to sing a hymn. And that's what it meant in New Testament times. See? But you go back, and people go back into the old etymology of the word, and they get back there hundreds of years, and they see it had something to do with the harp, and they say, well, isn't that instrumental music? Do you see the parallel between the two? Throw it out. Now, what does that have to do with James? Absolutely nothing, so don't ever bring it up again. And just put in there, it hit me today, it really is a parallel. Now then, it says, glory not. That word glory here means exalt over. Ooh, boy, you raise yourself over, and in this case, it's exalting over others. That I'm better than Oliver. That's what I'm striving for, to be better than Oliver. And so my actions then are geared to be better than he is. Right? So, if you have this, then glory not and lie not against the truth. So don't glory against that, and then don't lie against the truth. By the way, what do I have to do if I'm really going to knock Oliver down and make myself really look good so you'll see I'm really great? Do you suppose somewhere along the line I may have to lie something about Oliver? In our election, in the campaigning, were there any lies told? And when they got caught in a lie, did you notice they didn't apologize? They went right back and told it over and over and over and over again. That's what we talk about politics. That's this word here. So now, in the church, don't get caught up with your politics and trying to exalt yourself over other people. Now he said, if you do, this wisdom is not a wisdom that cometh down from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. Now, if I do this, I am set to show how great I am and lead the church away from Oliver so it can follow me. Or since Steve is sitting there and both of us are elders, I'm going to try to get you to look down on him and look at me as the chief guy. I'm the one you can really depend on, see? And so you have these things and they go on in the church. Now, if you do that, what he says is that this kind of wisdom is not from above. That is, it doesn't come from God. Now, when you go back to chapter 1 and verse 5, what does God say? If any of you lacketh wisdom, what do? Ask of God, and he shall give it to you. Okay? And again, in verse 17, he says the same thing, that he gives every good gift. He'll give it to you without variance. So this kind of wisdom is not from above, but it's earthy. That means it has its origin here on this earth. And it's sensual. That word sensual means belonging to our sensual instincts or animal-like characteristics. That part of a person that is not the spiritual part that wants to please God, but it's the part that wants to please your body. Do you have sensations in common really with all animals that causes you to want to do certain things? What about eating? What about drinking? What about sex? What about comfort? And all of these things, these are essential things. And so I want to become great because it will give me some kind of comfort. It'll give me power that you'll be following me and not somebody else. It comes from the essential part of man, is what he's saying. And then he said it's devilish. Now that word for devilish really means demon-like. It's like the demons. It has the nature and character of demons. It doesn't come from God. Doesn't originate with God. It originates to your lowest sensations that you've got, your basic base sensations that are in common with an animal. It's what you'd expect from the demons. Boy, does James tell it somewhere like it is. See, when he was telling about these things, then he goes ahead and he says in 16, for where jealousy and faction are, there is confusion and every vile deed. So now when you're acting that way, when I'm trying to get you to follow me, and I'm lying and I'm doing whatever I can to run Steve down to get you to follow me, then there's confusion. That word means it designates a state of disorder and disturbance and mental conflict which leads to confusion and tumult in the church. That's what it will lead to. Think about what would happen if Steve and I were in a fight and we're both trying to take control of the congregation. What would it bring within the congregation? Would it bring unity or would it bring confusion? And so I tell you what a horrible person Steve is. You go check on him and he says no, said, don't you know about Lowell? And then tells what a horrible person I am. Is there going to be confusion? You see? That's what he's saying. When we act this way, then, and we use our tongue in this way, all we're going to do is cause confusion. And every vile deed. The word vile means worthless, of no account, bad, wicked, and base. That's what it is worth. That's what the works are. See? Just absolutely worthless, harmful works when a person does such a thing as that. Well, now that's a word, that's the wisdom comes from below. Now then, I want to look right here in Romans 16, as I put up here. Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them that are causing the division and occasion of stumbling, contrary to the doctrine which you learn, and turn away from them. In other words, how do you deal with this kind of a factious man, see? For they that are set serve not our Lord Christ, but their own belly. You see, there's that essential part, see? Serving it somehow to get the power, to get the pride, to get the money, whatever it is. And by their smooth and fair speech, they beguile the hearts of the innocent. That's that electioneering. That is speaking in such a way that you're winning people away. Paul then says to Titus, he said, a factious man, after first and second admonition, refuse. In other words, you can't put up with this kind of a person in the church. Now, you need to go to him once and talk to him, and you need to go to him twice and talk to him. But if he will not change, then you are to refuse him, have nothing to do with him, knowing that such a one is perverted and sinneth, being self-condemned. He's bringing the condemnation upon himself. So, when James talks about this factious person, we can see it's a bad one. Okay, now we get down to 17 to come out to close out class. But the wisdom that is from above. Now this is the wisdom that comes down from God. Okay, what do we find here? The wisdom that comes down from God is first. Number one, it's pure. Then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without variance and without hypocrisy. Now, all of these things are things that you will find that a factious man has. But a man that has the wisdom from God doesn't have them. Now, pure, that means uncontaminated, completely good. You don't have anything in your life that shouldn't be in there. You have saturated your life with God's Word, God's will, and you don't have these things in your life. Then he said peaceable. Now that peaceable means lack of conflict, so that there's no fighting. I think it's kind of neat in Colossians 3:15. Paul said, and let the peace of Christ rule in your heart. That word rule there means umpire. Now, when I'm going through life, I need something to guide me. And on a ball diamond, it's the umpire. Or on a track, it's the umpire. I need something to guide me. All right, as I'm going through life, what should my guide be? What should my umpire be? Peace of God. What will bring about peace rather than conflict? Whatever it takes for me to bring about peace, that's what I should do. Then he says these other words, gentle. That means equitable, fair, mild, gentle, not demanding your own rights. What happens, Steve and I get in a argument here about something. And I say, I have as much right as you do. And he said, yes, and I have as much right as you do. And this is what I want, and I have some rights. And he says, and this is what I want, and I have some rights. What have we got? We got two guys that are not gentle. Neither one of them will give up their rights, be kind and mild. There's going to be division. But a wisdom that comes from above is we're going to have to give up that fairness. It's not fair. We hear that all the time. It's not fair. God never did say, I'm basing this up on what is fair. He tells us, here's what you do to bring about all these good things in your life. So be gentle. Don't demand your rights. Be mild. He's not saying give in to false doctrine, but be kind and gentle to another person. Easy to be entreated. Now that word entreated means to be persuaded, to listen to, obey, yield, comply with, open to reason, ready to listen to others. So we all know people that you wouldn't go to discuss a problem because they might bite your head off. What is a man really easy to be entreated? He's somebody that you know will listen to you. He'll give you a hearing. He'll listen to you. And he will try to give you the advantage. He will try to say, okay, I see your point. I see your point. I disagree with it. In my opinion, it should be this way. Now, we're not talking about doctrinal problems. I disagree. I think it should be this way. But let's do it your way. That's a person easy to be entreated. Without variance. That word means doubtful, partiality, divided opinion, unsure of yourself. So that you can never make up your mind of what you're going to do. No, I know what I want. So Steve and I are talking about it. He wants something else. Okay, I'm sure of myself, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm sure this would be the best, in my opinion. But I'm also sure of something else. I'm sure that his opinion is just as valuable as my opinion. And I'm sure that he's going to be right as many times as I'm going to be right. Right? And so I'm going to be sure enough, I'm going to say, okay, let's do it your way. Right? And it's not going to be just operated with a double-minded man, without hypocrisy. Hypocrisy literally means a play actor, a stage player, somebody who plays the part and appears to be something that he's not, a pretender. And that's why our Lord uses that word hypocrisy, hypocrite. So don't act like you're something that you're not. Really be this kind of a person. Really be pure. Really be peaceful. Really be easily to be entreated. And then the fruit of righteousness is fruit produced by doing what is right, and such works are sown in peace by people who make peace. And so if I will do what is right, I'll bring about this peace, I'll sow those works in peace, and what that will do is it's going to bring about more peace. And it's for them that make peace. So peace, how important is it? With wisdom from above. So, as we conclude then, chapter 3 is with the tongue. How much damage can be done? And then he deals with the teacher, teaching false doctrine. He deals with our tongues and saying things wrong. He deals with those of us who think we are so smart that we can't be wrong. And those of us who want our way, and we will do whatever is necessary to do it. And with all of this, we use our tongue, don't we? See? All of it, we use our tongue. And so he's showing us in practical Christianity, that is what you have to do in using that tongue. And remember this, when you bring all this under control, what kind of a person are you as far as spiritual growth is concerned? That's when you can say, I am mature. Okay, class dismissed.